Welcome. Hi, my name is Art Ellis. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at WHYY. We're a media partner for this event. I'd like to welcome everyone here to what will be, I'm sure, a very meaningful evening. And shout out to Friends Select School for hosting us here tonight. I think many of you know that earlier today, the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation and Mural Arts Philadelphia formally announced the plans for a new mural to be commissioned across the street at the Horwitz Wasserman Memorial Plaza. And this new mural will be a backdrop to the nation's oldest public Holocaust monument. And it'll be the first large-scale publicly commissioned mural dedicated to the Holocaust. WHYY is very excited to be part of this conversation tonight as our very own Marnie Moss-Cohen, host of The Connection, Fridays at noon on WHYY. We'll have a chance to talk with James Young, one of the leading scholars of Holocaust art and memorials. Also want to thank our arts reporter, Peter Crimmins, who did a story you might have heard on the radio yesterday. It's also on WHYY.org if you didn't catch it. And a shout out to Sarah Glover, our VP for News and Civic Dialogue, who's helped to coordinate some of the coverage here. You know, at WHYY, we like to get involved in these interesting conversations and look into the complexities of things. You might hear Marty ask questions about what are the challenges that artists might face when they're trying to address the Holocaust themes. Maybe they'll talk about the context of the Horwitz Wasserman Plaza and how that will shape the artist's approach to the project, but that's all to come in just a few minutes. I did want to share one personal anecdote about the connection between images and the Holocaust. When my father died a number of years ago, I was going through his scrapbooks and I found a very small photo, which I'm sure you can't see, but it's the kind of image you've probably seen about the Holocaust. It's a field of skeletal bodies. And the most interesting thing is an inscription that my father wrote on the back while he was in the army in Germany. It says, the photo is the remains of some 1,106 political prisoners at a concentration camp in Gardelegen. As the American army approached, all the prisoners were put in a building saturated with gasoline, and incendiary bullets were fired. Those trying to escape were machine gunned. And then it says, the picture was taken by our battalion intelligence section. One copy was given to each man in the battalion. So the Army was using this image to help the soldiers realize what they were fighting for. And it just struck me, at least personally, that there's just one of many examples, I'm sure, of how an image can tell an important story about the Holocaust. So as we move our story along tonight, I want to welcome Esther Kutash, who is the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. Esther is an accomplished nonprofit professional and lawyer. She became the Executive Director of the Foundation after serving as the project lead and acting director for 2 years. She is a native of Budapest and the granddaughter of 4 Holocaust survivors. Her commitment to the Holocaust Memorial Project is both personal and professional. As staff attorney at the Claims Conference, she oversaw the administration of $1.25 billion fund established by a consortium of Swiss banks, and she supported the assessment of more than 80,000 Holocaust restitution claims across international borders. Esther, please join us.
Art, thank you for your comments, and thank you for WHYY's partnership. It's stories like this that really inspire us for the work that we do. So I'm Esther Kutash. I'm the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation, and our organization operates and programs the Horwitz Wasserman Holocaust Memorial Plaza across the street from Friends Select. We're super excited to be in this moment today. Earlier, as you have heard, we have announced a collaboration with Mural Arts to bring a very, very large mural to the Holocaust Memorial Plaza. Once it's done, it's going to be over 2,000 square foot. Before we get into all the details of of the mural project, I wanted to take a moment to reflect how we got to this very moment. In the 1930s and early 1940s, thousands of European Jews found refuge in the Philadelphia region. To escape Nazi persecution, they left family and they left friends behind and settled down here to build a new life in Philadelphia. But they did not forget where they come from, and they did not forget who they left behind. By the late 1940s, they realized the scale of destruction that had affected their communities, as well as the unspeakable loss that they have all suffered. So in the mid-1950s, Holocaust survivors in this local community and other Jewish community leaders approached Nathan Rappaport, who was a Holocaust survivor himself, and he was a well-known sculptor at the time, and asked Nathan to create a public monument for that site at the head of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. And Rappaport's masterpiece was erected at that site in 1964, and as such became the first public Holocaust monument in the United States of the scale and kind that we have. And there was no better place to situate this public Holocaust monument than here in Philadelphia at the nation's at the birthplace of American democracy. And ever since then, the memorial became a sacred place where Holocaust survivors and their families would gather year after year to remember those who did not survive. And now fast forwarding about 50 years, the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation, our organization, was started in the early 2000s because we realized that the work that was initiated by the Holocaust survivor community needs to continue at this very site. To increase public engagement, we have added to the site several installations and artifacts that send a powerful message about the past. And the redesigned Memorial Plaza opened to the public in 2018, and today over 10,000 people visit the Memorial Plaza every year. And while this is certainly progress, our work with the memorial is not completed. As a society in America or globally, we have not been able to deliver fully on the promise of never again. We do not live in a society free of bigotry and discrimination. Anti-Semitic beliefs are plaguing our communities in America today. In fact, over the last 7 years, anti-Semitic incidents in America quadrupled. So much so that in 2022, we have had over 3,600 anti-Semitic incidents. This represents, just over the past year, a 36% increase. These include over 110 violent assaults on members of the Jewish community, 91 bomb threats towards Jewish institutions, over 490 incidents at the non-Jewish K-12 schools, and hundreds of incidents at college campuses. So as we look at the social context, these are the questions we need to consider in Holocaust education. At a pivotal time, when the community of Holocaust survivors can no longer lead the work of educating future generations, how can we bring the public together to fight anti-Semitism and bigotry? How do we reach young people who do not have a connection to this history? How do we make sure that the lessons of the Holocaust stays in our public conscience? These are the questions that we grapple with as we program and advance the Holocaust Memorial Plaza. So in a way, adding a mural to the memorial to serve as a backdrop to this historical place seems like a natural evolution. We have seen that generation after generation, the local Jewish community, together with the city of Philadelphia, wanted to carry the legacy of the Holocaust forward, not just to remember the victims and the survivors, but also to juxtapose this dark history with what we want our society to stand for, which are liberty, unity, and tolerance. So it is with this spirit that we embark on this journey to bring a beautiful and thought-provoking mural to the memorial, so that every person who happens up on this site not only learns more about the history of the Holocaust, but also becomes more motivated to stand up against all forms of hatred and discrimination that still very much affect our society today. This is the vibrancy and energy that we hope the mural will bring to this sacred place. The idea of having a mural at the Memorial Plaza originated from the co-chair of the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. His name is Jake Ryder. He thought that there is more that we can do with the Memorial Park to enhance it with visual storytelling. So we invited Jane Golden of Mural Arts to the site, and we were very excited to see that she also saw the potential of unlocking the power of this unique place with a mural. So for the past year, we have been working behind the curtains to get to this very important moment today. As we have considered this mural project, we recognize its magnitude and the importance of the plaza and the original monument to our community. There are individuals still with us who were involved in the incredible undertaking to commission the original monument. But there are many, many more who have passed away, so it is our duty to proceed in this project with utmost care and sensitivity. With that, I would like to thank Jane Golden, Lindsay Rosenberg, and Todd Bressie of Mural Arts for their extraordinary commitment, compassion, and leadership on this project. I would also like to thank the board of the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation and my fabulous co-worker, Sophie Dawn. Thank you, Sophie. And last but not least, a huge thank you to the Friend Select community, who is our gracious host tonight, as well as to Creative Outfit for their video and tech support today. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the legendary Jane Golden, Executive Director of Mural Arts. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everybody. Esther, thank you. Your words were beautiful. You are a pleasure, you and Sophie and your board, to work with. So I just can't begin to tell you what an honor it is. And when Jake sent me the email, like, I couldn't get back fast enough. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I want to thank the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation for coming to us. We're honored and grateful to take on this challenge of creating a mural that will add to the experience of this incredible memorial space. We see this project as a profound responsibility and an exceptional opportunity. People who know me know that I'm a wall hunter, so I've actually been drawn to this wall for a long time. I've looked at it, I've thought about it, I go to the space, I sit at the space, it's a place I don't often stand still, but in that space I do, and think and reflect. And in fact, I thought for a long time, we should really do something here, but honestly, I was sort of stumped. I wasn't sure who to reach out to. I didn't know if it was possible. I'm sort of surprised at myself, right? Because those of you who know me, I'm very tenacious about an idea. So anyway, it's an extraordinary site. So, but it's not just a wall, right? This is a place. It's a place of deep significance and meaning, a place where we bear witness to one of the most horrifying chapters of human history. It's a place also of civic importance in our city. So I see this as a complex and, to be honest with you, humbling responsibility. It's a complicated site at the head of the Parkway, already home to the powerful Nathan Rappaport Memorial to 6 million martyrs that was created, as you heard from Esther, in 1964. It's a place that evocatively bears witness to one of the most unthinkable chapters in our time. It invites us in to learn, to contemplate, to reflect. And it offers the hope that a nation dedicated to freedom and justice might offer a bulwark against those horrors. In 1964, when the original memorial was created, Philadelphia had become home to a growing community of Jewish Americans. This became a sacred space for remembrance and reflection. And how wonderful that it is along the Parkway and in the shadow of City Hall. You know, I've thought a lot about monuments and memorials. I think in a way that murals are monuments. It's intimacy in a public space. And then several years ago, we had the honor and privilege to collaborate with Monument Lab on a citywide exhibition that asked everyone the question, what is an appropriate monument for the current city of Philadelphia? You know, monuments often commemorate someone or something, but in their design, they often shut down conversation, or in the intervening years, their purpose is clouded or forgotten. The Memorial Plaza is something different. It's alive, it is subtle. It asks us to learn and connect, provides us with solace, or as I found, a brief respite for meditation, and a space to think, never again. In 2023, as you heard from Esther, we are facing both new and old realities. Very few survivors are still alive to talk about the stories of brutality and evil of the Holocaust. At the same time, our country is facing new evils, telling false tales of replacement rather than remembrance, and honestly, fostering division among new generations of Americans, Jews and non-Jews, who need to learn and reflect together on the truth and try to see a commonality in their experiences. You know, no single site, no one work of public art can speak to the whole truth of the Holocaust. But this is our opportunity to broaden and deepen our understanding of history so that it speaks to a more powerful and contemporary truth to ourselves and for our children. American Jews are feeling the growing weight of anti-Semitism, and as a Jewish person, I feel that as well. The truth is we are standing on precarious ground as a country and globally. From a personal perspective, my grandparents grew up talking about the Holocaust a lot. While they were both born here in this country, their families came from Austria, Germany, and Russia. Honestly, I think they were haunted by the Holocaust. They talked about it often, and that it could happen again. And I remember when I was growing up, my parents talking about when they were newly married, how when they were looking for a house, that they were limited where they could go. When my parents got into college, I remember they told me that not many Jewish people were allowed in. It seems sort of strange to me. It really wasn't the world that I lived in until I went to college and encountered anti-Semitism myself. They were ugly and hurtful comments. To me, I was shocked. To my grandparents, when I told them, it summed up all they feared. So how do we move forward? Well, we do so in partnership. We do so with care and humility. We do so with research and discourse and respect. I am really grateful to be working with two extraordinary people on this complicated project. Todd Bressie is a public art consultant who works around the country and has helped Mural Arts organize some of our most challenging projects. Thank you, Todd Bressie. And Lindsay Rosenberg, I have to say, is an extraordinary person and project manager. She has managed so many complicated projects with us and does so with extraordinary grace. Lindsay? Thank you so much. Our team has already been working with PHRF for a year, as you heard from Esther, to lay the groundwork for this day and what is to come. Starting today, artists can download the RFQ from the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation's website. We will have a multi-step process for the selection of the artist, and this will be critical to finding an artist who has an emotional connection to the Holocaust through a family, community, or cultural connection, whose experience, artistic practice, and approach to this project are clearly aligned with the vision and significance of this important project. And while this project is a collaboration with the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation, I am sure that it will live up to our motto at Mural Arts, which is to beautify, inspire, and empower. This carefully created mural will surely beautify this space. It will inspire all of us to create a place for healing and a better world where we can remember the past to ensure a better future. And it will empower us to seek empathy and understanding with all people in our community. That is the power of public art. Rebecca Solnit is one of my favorite essayists. And she says, together we are very powerful. And we have a seldom told, seldom remembered history of victories and transformation that can give us the confidence that yes, we can change the world because we have done so before. You row forward, looking back. And telling this history is part of helping people navigate towards the future. We need a litany, a rosary, a sutra, a mantra, a war chest of our victories. The past is set in daylight, and it can become a brilliant torch that we carry into the night that is the future. So I want to say that just reading those words and thinking about this project is really an honor of a lifetime. So I thank all of you who are helping to make this happen from the bottom of my heart. And now I get to do something very special, which is introduce someone who is like one of my favorite people in the city of Philadelphia, and that is Marty Moss-Coane, who is the voice of our city. She really is. I have listened to her for so long, as so many of you have. The way she has brought to light so many stories, it's extraordinary. In fact, when I saw her tonight, I was like, oh my God, Marty. We are honored that she agreed to do this, that she's here tonight to lead the conversation with scholar James Young. James, thank you so much. I have read about you and read your work, and it's truly an honor. And to lead this conversation, who is better than Marty Moss-Coane? And as a person who's totally addicted to politics, I always tune in. I was like, Marty. Anyway, Marty has a long and storied career at WHYY, and I want to thank WHYY. WHYY, we talk about the voice of the city. Journalism is our system of checks and balances. They keep us on our toes. They shine a light on critical issues, and I don't know what we would do without them. So WHYY, thank you. Most recently, Marty is the host and executive producer of The Connection, a new weekly show on WHYY FM, featuring wide-ranging conversations about what makes us human. Oh, so wonderful. Before that, for 35 years, Marty was the host and executive producer of Radio Times, one of the most respected weekday interview programs. Throughout her career, she has earned praise for her versatility and her ability to lead engaging conversations with guests and listeners alike. I think, Marty, when I think about people doing their job with grace and eloquence and intelligence and insight, that is you. So please, everyone, give a warm welcome for Marty Moss-Coane.
So generous. So thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and good evening, and it's wonderful to be here. It's really a privilege to be part of tonight's conversation about how to begin a conversation about what it will mean and what it will take to add a mural to the Plaza that we had a tour of this afternoon. And I'm really honored, and it's a privilege to share the stage with you, so let me introduce James E. Young. He's a scholar, author who has written widely on public art, on memorials, and national memory. He's one of the foremost scholars in the history of art, architecture, and memorials related to the Holocaust. He's advised on the creation of internationally significant projects such as Berlin's Holocaust Memorial and the September 11th Memorial in New York City. He is Distinguished University Professor of English and Judaic Studies Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where he is also the founding director of the Institute for Holocaust, Genocide, and Memory Studies. He's written numerous books that are considered benchmarks in the field, including Writing and Rewriting the Holocaust, The Texture of Memory, which I have here, At Memory's Edge, and The Strategies of Memory. So let's give a big round of applause to James. Where to begin? I want to begin with you, actually, because you have really dedicated so much of your life to the Holocaust, to understanding it, to understanding the memories of the Holocaust. And I know we could do a whole hour on this, but what drives you? What has driven you with such a profound and difficult topic?
I think the impossible questions that drive anybody, to study and then to go to work on these projects. So in the beginning, of course, I was a literary historian. I wrote my dissertation on Holocaust literature, doing a lot of the research at the sites of camps and museums, including Auschwitz, what they call Auschwitz I, where they had their library during the 70s and 80s when I was doing my dissertation research. And it was during that literary investigation that I suddenly realized that I can't talk about words on a page, even if these were words written by Sonderkommando Jewish victims in Yiddish and these little scrolls that the museum was letting me research, that I was doing it in this particular space. And these words meant a very particular thing growing out of this space. They were excavated in tin cans from beside the gas chamber complexes at Birkenau and brought into the museum. They were published eventually in Polish, Yiddish, and German. And I began to look at the room in which I sat, a former barracks, the barbed wire and the towers, pinning my research in, if you will, the walk to Birkenau, and realized that there was also a national narrative to be told, and that the Auschwitz-Birkenau, the camp, what they called the National Site of Martyrdom, was in fact a linchpin of Poland's own national historical memorial narrative. And it is as well in Israel. It has become a little bit of that in the United States and clearly in Germany as the ultimate counter-narrative. And Germany eventually has shown really the rest of the world how to commemorate your national shame. And that's that led to discussions in my work on the Denkmal, in which I was one of the jurors for that memorial process in Berlin.
A number of years ago, I was with my husband at Auschwitz. We did our own sort of personal Holocaust tour to try to understand what had happened, the horror of what had happened. And we had this incredible guide who took us from room to room, from building, from Auschwitz to across the street to Birkenau. And she kept saying to us, she would stop us and tell a story, and then she would say to us, "Can you imagine?" And for my husband, who's Jewish, for him, would I have survived? Who else of relatives that I don't know that probably died here or somewhere else? How could I live a life of meaning, in Auschwitz? For me, I'm not Jewish. For me, it was, would I shelter a Jewish family? Would I shelter a Jewish child? Would I be part of the underground? Would I work with the Nazis or would I work against them? And I wonder whether these profound questions about creativity and imagination, if that's what memorials are asking us to do, which is, can you imagine?
They are, but it also depends where and why and toward what end these memorials are initiated. At Auschwitz, it was kind of hard to know what to do, even, but there was a very early memorial process there. Henry Moore, the great British sculptor, headed a committee starting in 1957 to design and have an international competition with hundreds of submissions, a memorial to put at the end of the railway tracks at Birkenau. And they ended up awarding the first prize to the 3 finalists. And they made kind of a hodgepodge. And even that, once it was accepted finally in about 1962-63, took another 5 years to be installed. Wow. And when it was right in the middle of Poland's own anti-Semitic purges, 1966-67. And they put first up on a pedestal at the end of the tracks, kind of 3 slightly cubist figures of a man, woman, and child. And of course, the only men, women, and children at Auschwitz would have been either Jews or Sinti and Roma, otherwise known as Gypsies, the victims of genocide, all of them. And the Polish government very quietly took down the figures which had to refer to either Jews or Gypsies and put it down below, and then put up a big granite square with a single triangle in the center, denoting the political prisoners. And so it was just a way, again, to move the Jews, off to the side. And even the inscriptions, and by the way, inscriptions in stone do not mean in perpetuity as memorial builders want them to be. the inscription there would, here on the site, between 1941 and 1945, 4 million people, men, women, and children, suffered and died at the hands of the Nazi murderers. And that's simply not true. Yeah. It was about 1.1 million, 90% of them Jewish, the rest Soviet POWs, Polish political prisoners, Catholic priests. The gas chambers were used first on the Soviet POWs. So that had to change too after the fall of the wall, and parliamentary democracy came to Poland in 1989. And the first prime minister, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, said literally with the change in regime officially comes the change in national memory of what happened here.
Wow. So, I mean, in a sense, one very powerful person can change this idea of memory. And so much of what you study is about memory. And memory is so fungible, And there's traumatic memory, which is that you don't want to remember because it is so painful. How have you seen people wrestle with that, especially with memorials and monuments?
Well, contemporary artists like Esther Shalev-Gertz, based in Paris and Gothenburg, Halftime, try to create works that would somehow show the silences between words. And in one video installation, she had survivors who told their stories in video testimonies paused as they looked or searched for just the right word to suggest how do you show what words can't say? Yeah. How do you show the search for language to articulate a trauma that is buried so deeply in you it has no words? And so she wanted to show that, how to visualize that. So the contemporary artists have actually done so much, and it's not just kind of memory for its own sake, it never was. But some of the very early memorials, it was really about finding some kind of redemptory meaning, so that often the Jewish victims referred to themselves and their families as martyrs. And it was a very common way to understand that they died for something. They died for being Jews. They died, as they say in Riverside Park. Sophie, if you would bring that image up.
And this is obviously in New York.
Yeah, kind of reading this. So this is the memorial in Riverside Park. They call it the Stein now. And on every April 19th, there'll be a group of survivors and their children here laying stones. But in 1947, the Holocaust meant this. This is the site for the American memorial to the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto battle, April to May 1943, and to the 6 million Jews of Europe martyred in the cause of human liberty. Now, that would come as a surprise to the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis, that they were martyred in the cause of human liberty. But that was a reflexive understanding in America. You always know where somebody died. They were always martyred for the cause, martyred for the nation. They died so the nation might live, a very redemptory cycle, repeating itself, even here. And Nathan Rappaport's memorial in Warsaw, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, is actually addressed to the people of Israel, its heroes, and its martyrs. So in 1948, there were the martyrs who were murdered, and then there were the heroes who rose up and who resisted. And it was kind of either or. And so there has been an evolution over time, from martyrdom to, I think, most recently, as we see now, even in the amazing memorial, National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, that the arc of memory now bends toward justice. And the Equal Justice Initiative, partly inspired by the Denkmal in Berlin, by some of these forms, is very clear that this memorial was built toward justice, not toward explaining or redeeming the deaths of African Americans at the hand of Jim Crow and at lynchings, but we're going to remember toward justice and achieving justice at the same time. So that's where we've come, I think.
Well, let's talk about the site in Philadelphia. You and I were there this afternoon. Esther gave us a tour. And another Rappaport sculpture that was there put in 1964. When you see that site, and it's changed over time, what are your feelings? What are your thoughts? How do you connect with? what you see around you?
I often see these memorials as memorials or monuments to a very particular age, as they must be.
Right.
Every memorial monument is designed in a particular age, reflecting that age's particular aesthetic, political needs, understanding of the lost loved ones. I knew Nathan Rappaport pretty well in his last years.
What was he like?
He was great. he was funny, wry. He was also really a great artist, and he was not given his due completely in his lifetime. But the committee that proposed the memorial there on the plaza, once they had Nathan's maquette or model in hand, they insisted on writing Jacques Lipschitz to get a recommendation. And he wrote back in kind of an insulted tone and said, what do you mean? He's a great artist. I studied with him at the Beaux-Arts Academy in Paris, and he doesn't need my recommendation. He's a great artist.
Right.
Just do it, kind of thing. Okay. And there is Lipschitz in the neighborhood too, as Todd was pointing out today.
Yeah.
So Nathan created a monument that draws iconographically from the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial. There is a woman with her arms upraised, a baby with an upraised arm.
And we have it up there, yeah.
It's a little bit more abstract, and apparently in conversations I had with him, he said he was anticipating proposing a memorial for Philadelphia with what he called blue bloods, who needed abstraction and not just figuration.
Blue bloods meaning the wasps of...
Right, but he was a figurative artist.
Yes.
And as he famously said, why was the Warsaw Ghetto Monument, figures, these, proletarian, figures of Mordechai Yelevich, bare-chested, holding, the grenade in his hand like a hammer. And he said, well, could I have made a rock with a hole in it and said, voila, the heroism of the Jews?
Right.
He goes, no. I needed faces, I need figures, I need the power of the image and the body. And that's what people respond to, and he's right. And art historians have never been especially kind to the memorial, but I watched that memorial get performed by politicians, by the Pope, by presidents, by the Chancellor of Germany. And part of when I told the biography of that memorial, I made very clear that it lives in social and political time.
Yeah.
And it inspired the Solidarity Trade Movement. They met there before they marched, to Gdansk, for their, during their marches, and they saw themselves in the figure of the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto.
So imagining a mural that has not been created yet, so we're at the very, very beginnings of that.
Yeah.
Just how maybe revolutionary is it to have within this public space a giant, what did you say, 2,000 square foot mural?
I think Jane said it's going to be a challenge.
A challenge, yes.
And
That's an understatement, I
and
think.
it will be.
Yes.
It hasn't been done before. I mean, mural arts, nobody knows mural arts better than Philly. Nobody knows better than MAP.
Yeah.
And nobody's made more either. I mean, last night on my way back from dinner with my son, Asher, just in the space of a few blocks, I guess we saw a dozen gorgeous, amazing memorials coming back to the hotel.
Yeah.
So that's part of Philly's civic aesthetic culture. So that makes sense. A city of murals, if it's going to commemorate or adapt this plaza in any way, I guess it makes sense, to go in that direction. But it hasn't really been done before.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be really curious to see how it goes.
This may be an unfair question, but what would you have the artists, the would-be artists, grapple with or think about? Or you're not a muralist, but you've seen these monuments and memorials all over the world.
I would ask the artist the mural artist in this case, who might also be an artist in other media, other kinds of visual media, maybe plastic media, to sit in that plaza in several different places and kind of camp out for many days, talk to people who come through there, see where people sit, see what's there. I read somewhere, I don't know if it was in Todd's Presses or whether it was in Peter Crimmins' radio piece yesterday, that the trees planted there are necessarily a big part of this mural art. The artist will have to recognize them. The trees will both foreground and screen and create a canopy for different experiences. Low, does that mean the artist is going to go low, stay figurative but humanly proportioned, or they have to go so big to dominate the trees? But these are the things that artists wrestle with all the time.
But you're saying sit there maybe multiple times, different times of day, different seasons, see how people interact. It's a very public space.
And to be very clear in their mind, toward what end am I creating this memorial? Toward what aesthetic ends? Toward what civic ends? Toward what commemorative ends? And how is it going to work with what's in the plaza already? And those are questions that you've already actually articulated in the mission statement beautifully. So the artist will see that and have to go from there. And it won't be easy, but knowing artists, and as I do, I mean, they love the challenge. Go for it and see what happens. And they have to be open to all kinds of things and open to really knowing a lot about that space and its evolution. The fact that you're allowing it and even inviting it to evolve is what will keep this space alive in the next generation's mind. And it also introduces maybe the necessity of further allowing it to evolve, that it won't be the last thing that's done here either. And as long as you can build into them this adaptability, you allow every generation to find its own reasons for coming here and finding meaning here, which is amazing.
When you look at these memorials, whether here or around the world, do people have to be Jewish in order to create something meaningful?
No, I hope not. It's right in the center of kind of this ceremonial boulevard, the best known in Philly. Philly has a long past. It centers its identity, around the Liberty Bell, Constitution, writing the Constitution, and it will necessarily have to speak to all these parts of Philly's own civic identity. I think the complicated relationship would be the former reasons that what we call Jewish New Americans had for doing this memorial. Many of them actually survivors themselves or refugees.
The original
from Nazi
people,
Germany.
right?
And those would be very particular reasons. They were literally commemorating their parents or their grandparents. It was quite personal for them. And clearly, in their minds, their families were martyred, as Jewish martyrs, and they needed to find consoling redemption. It makes perfect sense. The reasons now are very different. And the generation is going to have to, I have a feeling, a new generation is going to be thinking a little bit more about justice than simply redemption in here. And how these memorials have evolved tells us a lot about how this country regards immigrants and new Americans. Right. So just as this memorial was being dedicated April 26, 1964, just about at the same time, the Warsaw Ghetto Resistance Organization, led by Ben and Vladka Mead in New York City, was proposing to New York City Arts Commission a memorial in Riverside Park to go on that place. Here is the site of the American Memorial, to Warsaw Uprising, et cetera. And they proposed another monument by Nathan Rappaport called Megillat Esh, or Scroll of Fire. Two large leaning scrolls which kind of tell the history of the Holocaust ending in the establishment of the State of Israel. And they proposed it for that place on the park. And New York City Arts Commission rejected it.
Why?
100%. They had
didn't like it.
They hated it. Three main reasons. First of all, aesthetically very unpleasing, really ugly. They didn't like the scrolls. Second, it's too depressing. This is a Riverside Park. This is where people walk their kids and their dogs. And third, this is the killer, it's not American history. Tell that to the new Americans whose history drove them to American shores. So they could reasonably have asked them, so you're telling us that American memory does not include the history of events that drove us here? And the answer to the question is, well, you're right. American history doesn't begin on American shores. It begins in the events abroad that drove them here. And when immigrants come here, they don't leave their memory on the beach. They bring it with them. Their lives, and their whole histories come with them, and they do become part of American memory. And in any immigrant culture, this has to be recognized.
You in this book, which I have here, The Texture of Memory, you say a really interesting thing. Instead of collective memory, you talk about collected memory. A subtle, but I think significant difference.
Well, it's to allow for the possibility of the disparate competing memories that different groups bring to any site. Memorial sites traditionally have tried to collectivize memories and assign all kinds of disparate memory one meaning.
That we've all sort of come together.
This is the national reason that you're here. And that reason will bind us all and unify us all. We now understand that it's a bit of a fiction, and it's also a bit of, it is what unites a polity on the one hand, but the reality is that all these different groups will come together here. And so by allowing for what I call collected memories, we have them assembled in a common site. So they are collected together, and maybe these collected memories will be assigned singular meaning. And that's okay. This might be the state's job to assign disparate memories very singular meaning, but more contemporary sites will allow for this disparity and competing memories at the same time. I think now many of these competing memories are being united in this arc toward justice, which is great. And in 20 or 30 years, there's going to be other reasons for making these memorials that we haven't even guessed yet.
Yeah. Well, thinking too about the generation that lived through the Holocaust, either survived it or lost people to the Holocaust, are themselves dying. I don't know how many people are left, but it's obviously fewer and fewer. So it's the next generation and the generation after that have to sort of reconfigure or reimagine, maybe reinvigorate these Holocaust memorials.
Sure. Well, this what they call the second or third generation, the children of survivors and their grandchildren, have a very different relationship toward these events, and often will be remembering them now in order, and they did this pretty early on, in order never again for this to happen. So they will be thinking of other groups and contemporary genocides.
Right.
And these memorials do inspire contemplation of other genocides, whether we read history backwards, to think of the Armenian genocide, coming forward, or the recent attempted genocides in Bosnia, Herzegovina, more recently in Kosovo, Kosovar Albanians being rounded up, almost 1 million of them, for certain destruction.
Yeah.
And then leads us now to kind of an interesting question, and Esther and I haven't got to talk about this much, but the averted genocide in Kosovo is commemorated by a memorial to rape victims during the Serb onslaught, attempted genocide of Kosovar Albanians, so that the whole experience is now commemorated in the figure of women victims of rape.
Oh, wow.
And
Goodness.
the only other memorial to women victims of rape in wartime is proposed in Budapest.
Wow.
Right now. And there is a winning design. I actually was on the jury that picked that. But it raises all these political problems, and it's so complicated. They asked me to come and announce the winning design. And I scribbled some notes down what I would say, and then I realized that I couldn't. That my announcing the design would certainly condemn it in the eyes of Orban, and it would be stopped. Mostly because I'd say, you can't just remember generically the victims of women victims of rape. You need to remember specifically whether they were German women in Berlin in 1945, the women in Pristina, in Kosovo, or in Nanking, but be specific. And also never allow your memorial to become a substitute for action against contemporary persecution. Sometimes people think that, this is the best way to stop new ones. So instead of actually intervening, you commemorate. And it has to be the other way around. And saying that in Budapest, I'm afraid, in this moment, that would have been the end of the process as far as the Orban government is concerned. So we're gonna have to give it time. But this is what happens once you go down the trail. So I know that this will also raise all kinds of really interesting problems that we can't even name at this point.
Yeah.
Never even imagined.
I do want to quote something from this book. You quote a man named Alex Grieger, and he's part of working in Boston for their Holocaust memorial. And he says, "It's not for my parents that I pursue this endeavor. This memorial will be for me because I was not there and I did not suffer. I cannot remember. Therefore, I very much need to be reminded. This memorial will be for my 6-month-old daughter, who will need to be reminded even more. It will be for her children, who will need to be reminded still more. We must build such a memorial for all generations to come who, by distance from actual events and people, will depend on it to activate memory."
What a great mission statement.
Absolutely, profound and moving and complicated, as you say, but it's about remembering something that you never experienced.
Exactly. And building it on a place that was not the site of Holocaust.
Right.
And Krieger goes on and actually includes his words. He's got a great little epigraph, which you see first when you walk. It's right off of the Freedom Trail in Boston. It's a Stanley Sadowitz design of 6 tall glass towers. But Alex introduced the words, as you traverse the Freedom Trail, stop to contemplate what the ultimate consequences of unfreedom are.
Right.
So
Unfreedom.
It's anchored, it's on the Freedom Trail. And what is this Holocaust memorial doing on the Freedom Trail but counterpointing?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which we saw
And
at the
that's what we
Plaza
have
today.
here and what we have in Washington, D.C. as well.
Yeah. You touched on this earlier, but there is this, as you have written, this sort of Americanization of the Holocaust. World War II wasn't fought on our soil. Our soldiers liberated the camps. We also prevented Jews from coming here as well, so we have our own complicated history, but what does it mean to Americanize the Holocaust? What does that look like?
Well, it sounds like it's a really deliberate thing, but it doesn't need to be deliberate. I would say it's reflexive. The President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, had to justify building a U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum just off the mall and dedicating it in 1993 for very particular American reasons, and reasons that he understood made this museum necessary. At the same time, there were other groups, including one led by Gus Savage, a congressman from Illinois, an African-American congressman, who said, this is great, that there's a Holocaust Memorial and Museum here now on the mall. What about a museum to African-American history and slavery?
Right.
And the only answer to that question is coming up. I mean, you have to, and you know, it's a memorial matrix, national legacy on that mall. And it had to come, and it was an example I used in Berlin when they asked me what to do or what's our problem. I go, well, no one else you're paralyzed by this conundrum, how to rebuild and reunite your country on the bedrock memory of a national crime, and how to remember, the European Jewry that, Germany almost wiped out. Nobody's ever made these the centerpieces of their national memorial history. We remember our national triumphs, our national martyrdoms, our divine election as a nation, but we don't build our national memorial heritage on the memory of, in this case, America's original sin,
yeah.
which might also include the genocide of indigenous peoples, obviously.
Right.
And so, in fact, we did get an amazing museum on the mall now to African American history. And we now have what I regard as one of our three great, 21st century memorials in the memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, known as the Lynching Memorial, but the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. They had to be made, and so in Germany I said, so where, for example, is there even a pebble on the National Mall? And I said this in 1998. To commemorate the slave auctions, which were held right there on the mall in front of the Capitol building. Not one. You wouldn't even find a pebble. Right. And we haven't done it yet. And now, of course, we've got the German example in a way.
And Germany is an example of how a country can, I don't say embrace their history, but at least acknowledge and grapple with their history. Through their memorials and monuments.
Yep, and we're getting there. It was a great piece in The Atlantic by Clint Smith a little bit ago, exploring this, and he's writing a whole book now on how we can learn from Germany on how to commemorate slavery in this country.
So what does a memorial ask people to do? I mean, is it to sit and reflect and remember? As we were walking over there and I saw the design, and I could imagine my grandsons wanting to climb all over would that be sacrilegious to do that? Should we always be reverential?
I don't think it would be sacrilegious. I think that these memorials have to live in public places.
Right.
And you have to expect that they will be treated as a public place, for better or worse. You look for decorum. You can maybe call for decorum, but you might not be able to mandate it.
Right.
In Germany, the parliamentarians were so anxious about how to protect the Stele. What happens when they graffiti them? What happens when the neo-Nazis, start putting swastikas on them? And as jurors, we said, you leave it up for 7 days, you make it a teaching lesson, and then you scrub it off. And so the faces of the Stele in Berlin and the Denkmal are actually impregnated with a solution that allows you to clean everything off. So you can't make a permanent magic marker does not leave permanent marks on those. So they wipe them off. They've got other problems, which is they're breaking down because they're not thick enough. But that's another problem. But it would be a problem to desecrate, by a mural, for example, and if you make public murals, nobody knows better than MAP that they kind of get added to, whether you want them
Right.
two are not. And when did, graffiti, which graffiti art was for a while kind of an enemy, but now is inspiring mural art. It's been co-opted even, or set the model, depending on which way you want to go with it. So how prepared will the sponsors of this memorial be to have it added to? In ways that you didn't prescribe or anticipate. It's kind of built into the process, so you need to be able to know what you're going to do in that instance. It gets reported, it becomes part of the history, part of the reception, and then you keep moving forward.
We heard, and we should know about the rise of anti-Semitism, but does that create a kind of urgency for this project
Which
the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, create a kind of urgency to do something at this memorial park?
I'm sure it did, and it does.
Yeah.
We do need to keep asking the question, to what extent does remembering the Holocaust inoculate people against anti-Semitism? I wish it did more. I'm not sure it actually does. But we're still finding a way to propose remembering the victims of former race hatred, to preempt new race hatred, and to continue calling attention to it, I think is a great way of preempting. It's like shaming, haters. Not that haters have all that much shame to begin with.
It's hard to hate them.
But it's kind of, we keep trying. So it's yet one more attempt to go there and try it.
Yeah. We're going to take questions in just a couple of minutes, but let me just ask one or two more questions, and then we'd love to hear from you. How does, from your experience, this public park, this public place, we've got City Hall, we've got the Art Museum, we've got hotels, we've got, fountains or whatever. How do you see it relating, and how should a memorial or monument relate to the surrounding area?
I think it's great when they actually gesture in some ways, topographically, to these other places, or maybe even iconographically. There might be an echo. Doesn't have to be that obvious, a dome or a bell, but Maya Lin's design for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial has one axis pointing at the Washington Monument and the other at the Lincoln Memorial. It's her way of tying it in, even as she clearly counterpoints the great white tall monoliths, with the black inverted -4 monument there. But it's still acknowledging, she still locates her form very clearly in relationship to other memorials. So it will become part of what I would call a memorial matrix in Philly, which is already a pretty loaded memorial matrix.
Yeah.
And it will enrich it. It will create new resonances, new echoes. It will make the other sites meaningful in slightly different ways, even as it also will become more meaningful in relationship to these other sites.
Right.
So it really does need to talk to them. And I would hope that people would see it on the walk, and their memorial tours. You're just coming up and down the parkway, you'll have a good dozen places to stop and contemplate and watch, and you've got murals galore on the way.
Yeah.
So this will be one more. So I'd be curious how this mural will actually relate to other murals. Will they be in the same color palettes or the same register, the same style? How abstract, how figurative, how narrative will they be? And I would expect that whoever eventually is chosen will need to be a bit of a scholar on Philly murals to make sense of what goes up there.
How they all fit together.
They cannot pretend that this is sui generis and nothing else exists. They have to do it in relationship to what is already around it.
In your mind, is there a memorial that you think, or a site, memorial site, that is successful, the message is clear, it is understood, people connect to it? I was going to say favorite, but that feels like a cheap question.
Well, the most powerful ones often are anchored in the sites themselves. Whether Treblinka, the 17,000 granite shards in that site, the Warsaw Ghetto Monument is anchored, right next to the bunker, Mordechai Anilevich's bunker. Even the Denkmal is anchored, at the ministerial gardens, parts of Nazi headquarters, nearby, within sight of the Brandenburger Tor and Potsdamer Platz. Goethe's statue is right across the street in the Tiergarten. The T4, or the Euthanasia Memorial, is just about a 3-minute walk, away through the Tiergarten. So it relates to all these other places. Sometimes wondering which one should come first, and not wanting to create a hierarchy of memory has paralyzed processes, and that was the case for a while in Berlin. Good historians, Reinhard Koselleck, said, do not create a hierarchy of victims. We don't want just a Jewish one. What about, the victims of, Nazi euthanasia? What about the Catholic priests? And, what about the POWs? And my answer at the time was, it's good to be aware of that, but wherever you start, the others will follow. And it won't create a hierarchy, but it will create a matrix so that you will be going from one to the other, wherever you go. And this idea of the hierarchy, creating a memorial hierarchy, is an issue which needs to be addressed. For 9/11, this was an issue because the families desperately needed, the families of firefighters and first responders definitely needed their loved ones who died when the towers came down to be distinguished, but without privileging them.
Yeah.
And the artists, the architects Michael Arad and Peter Walker, created meaningful adjacencies so that everybody's remembered next to whoever the families wanted them to be next to, and that the first responders would be marked by a ladder company number or a precinct number, just to designate that they were, in fact, victims who died in the civic good. They died both personal, private deaths for their families, but they also died in the civic sphere. Right. They weren't just there at the wrong time or the wrong place, but they went there to rescue.
To save people.
So it has to be done with nuance, and it's tricky.
Yeah, very tricky. Do you want to come on up then? And there are, I think, 2 microphones are going to be available. So Jane and Esther are going to come up. Do you want to sit on my lap?
Yes, I would actually like to.
Oh yeah,
more
I think
chairs?
we're getting some chairs
Okay.
here, so,
Sure.
yeah. And there will be microphones. Oh, there's a microphone here.
You want mine, Jane? Okay.
We're just going to get a chair, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, nice challenge you chose for yourself.
So obviously, if there are some specific questions about this process, we've got 2 people who can answer that question, and we have a question right here.
Hi, and thank you for all your comments and insights. I have the following question. Without giving up the faith, I think it's clear, faith in humanity. I think it's clear, though, that it seems to me that Holocaust education has not done the job of preventing hate that we thought it would. And I'd like to know if you agree with that. I see you shaking your head. So therefore, I'm thinking perhaps even the overt goal should emphasize the need to stand up and be counted.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, should they be more overt? Yeah. Could this even be written into the mission statement for the mural? Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes we have to be really explicit rather than just hoping passively that, you learned your lesson, no more hate. And as we've learned, and even as, poor Elie Wiesel reminded us over and over again, that it didn't stop anything.
Yeah. Can I add a little bit to that? So, a Holocaust education in the American school system happens at 2 points. Through English language arts, typically around 6th or 7th grade, and through history, social studies, in 10th grade. And these are the only times that our children are hearing these lessons. So it's not so much that Holocaust education overall it's not working, it's more that we are not doing enough to introduce these topics and repeat them over and over again as we do it with other huge moral failings that, whether it affected this country or elsewhere. So that's, I believe, number one, that we don't talk about it enough in our education system, and we don't know what people talk about at home. The other issue that we have, I think, is that our children are learning differently today than what Holocaust education has been historically about. So kids now are digital learners and visual learners. So it's not that there's anything wrong with the history books, not at all. But that's not how our children are really learning today. So when I'm thinking about a mural, I think what a great opportunity we have with visual storytelling, to send a really, really powerful message. Now, are we going to be able to teach the comprehensive lessons of the Holocaust through one mural? Absolutely not. But can we highlight all the challenges that the Jewish community faced and what its relevance is today? Can we teach this action-oriented approach that you're referring to, stand up against hatred? I think that's what our hope is.
I mean, can a mural actually reference that need to stand up?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yes, the history of it starting in the Wall of Respect in Chicago in 1968. I mean, the history of muralism, think of Diego Rivera.
Yeah, Rivera.
There's, I feel like we're part of a wonderful tradition. But I think, I want to say this, I think we can only put so much on what a mural can do. It's the process and how people interact with it, right? It's because in my history of doing murals, let's go back in the day, when I worked for the Anti-Graffiti Network, we would go to these meetings and hear a million things, and then we would deliver on that because we would feel the pressure of having to put everything in this, and I now call it content overload. And so the murals, if you look at early murals, A, they're not very good, and B, we often had arches as some kind of device because in between, there was so much going on, because we had a hard time editing, because we didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and we thought we would just take it literally. Now we say, of course, we appreciate everybody for their feedback. This will not be taken literally. Because you want to give the artist the space to breathe. That doesn't mean that it can't be really powerful, right? I mean, when I look at Diego Rivera's work, I find it breathtaking. His composition, his narrative, his color choices, it's all incredible. And that inspired a nation. So, I mean, I think we have to think aesthetics and content, of course, right? You balance both. And where does the power come from? I mean, I've stood in front of works of public art, and sometimes it's the color, sometimes it's subtlety and nuance that's there that sort of moves you. And look, this just has to be excellent. And that's what we have to strive for. And I hope the subtext, to go back to your question, I hope it moves people. I hope it's evocative. I hope it's challenging. I hope it lifts our hearts and souls. And I hope in some way it moves the needle. I always aspire for that.
Thank you for that question. Yes, any more questions from the audience?
We love questions.
Yeah, we love questions. Yes, please.
While we were walking over here, we were trying to figure out where this is going to be located. So if it's a mural, it means it's an existing wall. Is that the wall that you showed up there that faces 16th Street?
Yeah, I should bring it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of pictured this with that up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there it is.
Well, that has vents in it. It has different textures. It's not a solid wall. I'm sure Is that
Yeah.
going to cause difficulty?
No.
It'll only cause the artist difficulty. That's the artist's
challenge.
job. Yeah. But you're right, it's a good question.
We work on a lot of complicated sites, and we don't want to back away because it's complex. But the artist will, you're right, will have to take that into consideration. There are going to be a lot of considerations. You know, the main one being, how do we not subsume the site, right? They have to sort of dance together in a way that's really profound. I think that's really the challenge.
I wonder too, for you, Jane, with just murals in general, they get weathered. You know, it rains, it snows, there are storms that come through. Can you imagine this sort of changing over time, looking different in 20 years after?
That's a great question. I mean, sometimes they fade, and the fading actually makes it even a bit more mysterious and complex. But the truth is, there is a shelf life to murals. We have a mural restoration program, and we're always really asking the city for more dollars to protect this iconic collection.
Whole other interview. Right.
Another interview on
Yes,
that, too.
right, exactly.
Anyway, but it's, you know, look, we assume responsibility for the collection of work in the city. I think if I were running PMA, I'd have a responsibility to the collection. This is like an outdoor museum, and we try our hardest to maintain it. And sometimes, you know, we are stewards of it. So sometimes every 5 years, 6 years, we try to visit the murals to see if they need a coating, a glazing, washing down, like what is it that's going on with this? This is a really good surface. There's not, you know, sort of Philadelphia being such an old city, old architecture is sometimes problematic as flashing or the leaks in the roof. So we won't have those worries. We'll use the best paints and sealers, all of that. But, you know, we do have to, you know, understand that as time goes on, it will change.
It will change.
I mean,
yeah.
it's possible that some artists would like to build into their work the span of time between their designing this and the time that we're looking at it. So they want this to have weathered for 20 years to understand that this is also memorializing not just the Holocaust, but also the moment in which it was made.
Yeah.
And that it's going to memorialize as well the 20 years that have passed. And you need to build that capacity into it. You know, it's like the question that came up in Auschwitz. At one point, Ronald Lauder put up $40 million to conserve Auschwitz. And they asked, so do we conserve from 1945, how it was, or from 1950, 1960, 1967? What's the point at which we are conserving? And in fact, the answer, I think, is that you have to allow these sites to weather and to show the span of time. It must show what happened, and what happened 50, 70, 80 years ago. And that, too, is part of its memory.
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act that especially mural artists will have to
Yeah.
deal with.
And I will admit, I mean, I was joking about the old murals, but there is something about seeing the older murals around the city as sort of, you know, we talk about in some way it's like the autobiography of our city. There's something about them, like when I go by the Black Family Reunion mural at 40th and Parkside that was painted in 1988. It speaks to who we were in 1988, right? And I hope some of them, I don't want them to really all go away. And in their weathered condition, they speak to us as a city.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. I think, did you have a question?
It's kind of
Yes.
the poetry of
Yeah.
murals, really.
So I thought it was interesting when you mentioned graffiti, and you said that you'd like to keep it up as a learning example for 7 days or something like that. There's been a lot recently about social media and the cheapening of memorials because of TikTok and Instagram worthy moments, and I was just curious about your thoughts on that and how we can kind of balance people's experiences while not cheapening the effects.
It's really hard and depends so much on, you know, taste, and it's obviously very offensive if you feel a personal connection to a site like this and it's graffitied, you feel personally assaulted. But you know, for kids who don't know any better, they might not even mean harm. That actually just means they're living in it, and this is how they live in the space. that they can't visit a space without recording themselves in it, otherwise it's not meaningful. And we have to tell that story too, whether we like it or not. Sometimes you just need to document that this is how this generation is living in these sites, whether we like it or not. And, there are signs at the Denkmal, no bicycles, no drinking, no eating. There's a lot of telling people what not to do there. And there are a lot of German memorial artists like Jochen Gertz who actually spoofed that by creating a memorial at Dachau that was just a sign of all the things you can't do there, suggesting that memorials have built into them the logic of authoritarianism, telling you how to think, how to remember, what to think. And so this is a generation that doesn't really trust memorials in that way because they feel that they have kind of that didactic authoritarianism built into them, as the Nazis designed their own memorials to be.
It's fascinating.
When we did Monument Lab, I remember an evening with Sharon Hayes, who did a monument that was a tribute to the lack of women in public art, public memorials. And I remember when she asked her group of about 40 women of all ages gathered. And
Jane, there's a microphone for you there. Someone's sneaking there.
sorry, I used this. So I have this and this. Okay, good. Just didn't want to, whatever. So people in the audience, they were like, oh, we can't relate to monuments at all. And they felt like murals were monuments because that was what was relatable to them. And the idea of the work along Kelly Drive, or it was something sort of so distant and foreign. So it's really interesting how memorials, like what they even mean today. And really in Monument Lab, a lot of the work that we did was really transitory. It was mostly not permanent work, but incredibly powerful. And sometimes I think that's okay too, because the memory of it sort of drives us to have more in our lives. We want more art. We have an appetite for it. And the memory of it can sometimes be just as inspiring as the object itself. Once it's gone, it stays with us in our hearts.
Yeah. Yes, a question back there.
Hi. So one of my favorite murals to talk about in my class of yours, Jane, is the Peace Wall. And I just love how you incorporated children in painting that wall. Is that a thought of having some of the Philadelphia students helping with this wall in terms of paint?
Well, I mean, I think the Peace Wall was a project that we did in 1998 in Grays Ferry when all communication between blacks and whites had shut down. And we had the idea to do a peace mural. And I remember Ed Rendell saying, "What? You're so naive." And we were very persistent and knocked on doors. And I went around with the deputy mayor. And we eventually got people to say they wanted hands, a mural of hands, which could be so cliche, but my husband's a filmmaker and suggested using real people's hands, some of which were kids. And so we took the picture and then we projected the image, which meant that everybody was gathering every night because they thought we were showing a movie, and then we're like, no, we're actually doing a mural. And then people started they were definitely talking to us, and then they started talking to each other, and we're like, well, this is phenomenal. They're talking to each other. That's great. And so it actually was a successful project in the face of everything that was going on. So we were able to incorporate people like right off the bat in the project. I think for something like this, the process should involve young people, but I want to be very respectful of what's going to happen, not knowing who the artist or the team of artists are going to be. And I think there's a way to incorporate people into the process. We certainly do this all the time. I mean, Lindsay Rosenberg was just part of a 24-story incredible mural in the heart of Chinatown. It's the Crane Building. If you haven't seen it, please go see it at 11th and Vine. And like 200 people were involved in that, but the artists were really primary. So that design is extraordinary. So, but the input came from young people and elders and everybody in between. So there's a way of you can engage people, and it doesn't sort of take away from the sort of sophistication of the aesthetic sort of sense of a project. So, but to answer your question without being too long-winded, which I've already been, yes, we would want to involve people. We just want to be respectful about how it happens.
In the mission statement right now, there is an invitation to be open to painting projects on site. to whether children or adults. So there is an explicit invitation to participate, and the artist needs to build that into the project, I guess.
Yeah, there should be engagement. I think that's really, it could be very powerful, very profound, and we would love to see it without being didactic and letting the artist breathe and sort of, I always think that we co-create the work together in Philly, and that's what I'd like to see here.
Anything you want to add to that? No. Another question? Yes.
So in the Holocaust exhibits and memorials that I've experienced, the most effective are the ones that get the observer to put herself or himself into the situation. What, as you said, what would I have done? Could this have been me? And it's difficult to do that with a static mural, but I would hope that somehow the artist would try to pull in the observer so that there's some interaction with the mural and the observer. And I think a good artist can do that, and you've gotten good artists in the past, so I'd urge that.
I think that's one of the inherent challenges of this project, but we've taken on other challenging projects where I've felt like in some way, doing this work over all these years, it's really like, I always say, like, it's like a leap of faith. It's because you don't really know where you're going, right? You have an idea, but you have a really complex theme. You have constituents, some of whom at times don't like each other, don't get along. There's huge acrimony. They're mad at the city. They're mad at each other. And you're like, somehow art, where an artist is going to come into this and figure this out. Like they're in the forest and they're looking for a flashlight and that trail. And more often than not, they find it. And that is the transcendent power of art. I believe it with all my heart.
Lovely. Any more questions? Yes, right there.
So, which is clear in this memorial, on the physicality of a place, in these low walls that might also be benches, there are either divots or metal pieces, which are a very clear message to skateboarders. Please don't play here. Honor this space. And I'm really curious to know, in doing murals, is there any kind of messaging that goes on about please respect this space? I mean, that's physical, but it's a curiosity. Like, what kind of message could we convey to say, this is a place to be honored, but in painted form? I don't know that exists. It's just, have we thought about
That's
this?
a good question. I hadn't really considered that because I don't think, I guess I find this to be such a sacred space. I sort of make that assumption that everybody, that's not so much my worry as I think about graffiti, whether somebody would write on it. Mostly murals are pretty respected, but the younger generation of graffiti writers, they don't have the same moral compass, the moral code that back in the day they had. So I think something that we might have to grapple with. And I think for us, when graffiti goes on a mural, I want to get it off as soon as possible. I want them, to know, and I worked with graffiti writers for a long time, and it's just not okay. It's a work of art, and they just need to go, they find the impulse, they should go find a blank wall, or if it were up to me and I were in charge of the city, I'd have legal walls around the city. I would bring back the anti-graffiti network. I'd rechannel energy, have more young people doing artwork. So, but I'm not in charge. So I can dream, I can keep hope alive.
Not yet, anyway.
But there was a mural, I just want to say, there was this, after George Floyd was murdered, I didn't know about this mural, it wasn't done through us. There was a small mural around a trash container in Logan, and it was defaced by horrible symbols of white supremacy. And somebody who worked for Channel 6 called me up, and they were like, you probably haven't seen this, but I'm going to text you photos of this. It's like so awful. And I was like, you're right, that's awful. I don't know who did the mural. We're going to find out. We're going to fix it. And like within a week, we were like detectives, and we tracked down the artist. He was a sanitation worker. He had no formal training. This vision was in his head of the murder of George Floyd, and these symbols were awful. We took out the symbols. I said, look, now you're going to do a mural on a wall, no wrapped around a trash container. And we said, those symbols will not sit there. We were like, they've got to be gone. We're going to do a mural. The George Floyd mural lives, and it was painted, I guess, 8 months ago, and no one's touched it, which is a good thing, because if they touch it, we're taking it off immediately.
Good.
Yeah, so we deal with these vandalism issues at the site all the time. We haven't had a graffiti yet that has added to the beauty of the plaza, so our decision is always to take it down as soon as possible. But we only had one incident when the intent was clearly anti-Semitic. Somebody went, put some swastikas on the 6 pillars, and we worked with the city to figure out who it was, and we put some of the images out there that capture this. And within 24 hours, the community really came forward and identified this person. So with all the bad that's happening, there's also a keen quality here in Philadelphia to understand right from wrong. And most of the time, the incidents we do see are just, knucklehead, like a couple of, swirls. It's really not, it does not raise any concerns about anti-Semitism or so forth, so we just take it down and we don't make it any big deal. We understand that we're in a public space and different people have different behaviors.
Great, yeah, let's make this the final question. Yes, sir.
Sometimes I think there's nothing new under the sun, and sometimes I think it's all happened before. So we're living at inflection points of ignorance, of denial, of book banning, and of hatred. And I wonder how art and the activism of art changes. It feels to you like it needs to change now at where we are now. Is it any different than it's been throughout? I mean, I was there when the 64 monument was commemorated, and how powerful that image has been all my life. I wonder how it's changed over time. How do you tell the message differently? How do you get to ignorant people? How do you get to denial? How do you get through hatred differently with art?
Do you want to take that, James?
I think that the contemporary artists designing this in 2023, 2024 will certainly take into account our own national weird regression toward denying events of American history, cleansing them, whitewashing them. And I would be very surprised if there weren't some reference built in to whatever we have to that moment. That it might refer to some of America's not just indifference to Jewish refugees during and before the war, but indifference to African American history in this country. And how to refer to the Holocaust without referring to our own national blindnesses and new denialisms. I think if I'm an artist, I'm thinking about that, and that's what I'm going to be working on. I mean, might not be the artist that's chosen in this case, but it's going to reflect the moment and the preoccupations in the moment. And you're exactly right; those are our preoccupations. Here we are doing this right in the midst of, states now outlawing, the study of African American history, actual history, and denying it. Germany somehow showed us how to go forward, or despite itself, and this country's going to have to find that same way.
Great, thank you for the question, and thank you, James Young.
Thank you,
Thank
Marty.
you.
Great. Thank you for everyone for being here tonight. Have a good night. Thank you.